Hey there, Adventure Machine subscribers. Today we're working on a 950 Super Enduro and gotten down into the point where I'm going to check the valve clearances and I'm going to take you along for the journey. The Super Enduro, it's a little bit different than, say, the Adventure and the other variants. For the most part, they're identical, the 950s and the 990s. So what I've done is I've taken the carburetors out, airbox, all that, and taken the cam covers off. I've left the spark plug tube in place. For at this point in time, I don't know whether or not I'm going to have to take the cam bridges off or not. Taking the spark plugs out, and I just, the quick and easy way is with the KTM kit, the spark plug socket. The way that I get the spark plug coils out is when they're inserted into the engine, this portion sticks kind of above the cam cover. I use a long screwdriver as a pry bar directly underneath this connector, as close to the base as I possibly can. Do a quick little twist on it, make sure I kind of loosen up any of the stiction on the rubber, and then I pry this up, and this is before taking the cam cover off, of course. These are the spark plugs from the 950. These are the early CR8 EI X or EIK. Yeah, so these are the OEM spark plugs with the twin ground leads. All right. The other thing that you're going to need is, it's all right here. I already set that there. So it's a 14 millimeter hex drive. Need to get to the crankshaft, and to get to that, you take this plug out. This is a factory plug. It's a plastic, so when you put it back in, don't use very much torque at all. So going back in here is the crankshaft, and so we can turn the crankshaft in any direction we want to. You can see the cams are moving as I'm moving this. Okay, so we're going to bring the rear cylinder up to TDC, and I know that that is really close to TDC. There's marks on the cam wheels or the cam gears themselves. And then the other thing that I do, actually have to grab the tool from the tool in here. Where did I put it? Right there. That'll work. Okay. So to visualize the position of the piston relative to the stroke, take a very long and smooth screwdriver, and you can use something else that's about the same length. Big barbecue skewers work, whatever, but I like using something that's fairly stiff, doesn't have any sharp edges on it, and is long enough to go through the whole stroke as the crankshaft and piston move. What this allows you to do is visualize, if I can hold the camera enough, let's just clamp this in a spot so that you guys can see it while I'm using both my hands. That's not going to work. You gotta see it this way. Yeah, all right. So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure down on it right there, and I'm going to move crankshaft. You see it moving. So as I bring it up, keeps moving slightly. There's right in there is TDC. So this is really close to TDC. And the reason why I check this and verify that is I have seen where the cams have been installed incorrectly. And unfortunately, I've done it as well. The thing that we need to look for is on the other side. It's really hard to see it. On this cam gear, there's a mark. And there's going to be one on this exhaust cam here as well, which you can't see, and I can't see very well either. So those marks need to be in line with this horizontal surface. And I verify that on both the front and the rear. Okay? So what we're going to do now is, I'll just kind of walk you through what we're going to do. I'm not actually going to do it. Is we check the exhaust, we check the intake clearances, and let's suppose that we find that one of the valves is out of spec. I would take a fairly large flat blade screwdriver and I would stick it under this lip of this spark plug tube and pry it against one of the surfaces that can handle something coming up against it, like this bolt right here, and pry this up and out. These things are in there and can be difficult to get out, and that's the only way that I've found to do it without really screwing things up. So pry underneath the lip against that bolt. You take that out. So let's assume that, let's say, this valve and this valve are out of spec. We would write all of that information down, what that measurement is. I usually draw kind of a diagram similar to what you would see here. So 2 circles in the back, 2 circles in the front, and the same thing for the front cylinder, 2 circles in the back and then 2 circles in the front. I would record the clearances that I measure, and taking that tube out, and I would take the 8 bolts out, and I would remove the bridge and take the 2 cams out. The next step that I would do is I now turn the engine clockwise to the point where the front cylinder comes to TDC. So we can watch this. Oops. As the cams get close, and now it's easier to see the marks on this side, on the forward cam set, because they're on the exterior and you can actually see it. So those dots need to come to the horizontal plane. And that one's hard to see as well. And then I would measure the clearances here. And if I need to change anything, I would take the bolts out, take the tube out, take the cams out, make the changes that I need to make, put this cam bridge and assembly, cams and everything back in together, and then I turn the crankshaft back clockwise to the point where the rear cylinder is then at TDC, which is really close to right about there. And you'll notice that the motor wants to turn when it's at TDC because there's pressure on the springs and it wants to settle to a point where it doesn't have any pressure on it. So I bring the cylinder back to TDC with using the screwdriver down the spark plug hole method. I would put my shims in based upon the measurements that I made previously, put the buckets back in, everything, cams, bridge, bolt everything back down, torque it, and then I would cycle the engine through 360 degrees, and then go back and double check that the clearances are within specification. So real quick recap. Measure. If I need to change, I start from the back, write everything down, take the cams out, rotate the engine forward to top dead center front, which is, I remember right, it's 200 and some odd degrees. So it's, if you put a device down the spark plug hole, it's not the first time that the piston comes to the top, it's the second time. You can make this thing into what some would call a twingle if you go top dead center fire, and then as soon as this piston comes up and you set the cams in at TDC at that point, it would fire. That is the wrong way to do it. It'll run, not very well, but it will run. So anyway, getting things confused. Measure, write it down, take it apart if you need to, cycle this all the way up to TDC, second time around. Measure, take it apart if you need to, put the right shims back in, reassemble, rotate the engine backwards to the point where the rear cylinder is now at TDC, put the correct shims in, put the cams back in, bridges and everything else, torque everything up, rotate the motor through 360 degrees, and then check your clearances. And that's my head-to-wind Adventure Machines how to check and set valve clearances on an LC8. Enjoy.